Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint Netcast number 156. Damn it, and I've been practicing that all week. 156, recorded live and in Technicolor on Monday, May 6th, 2013. Of course, I am your host in full color, Todd Klindt, back from a refreshing vacation last week, so I'm all rejuvenated and revitalized, and here to tell you all about what's going on in the SharePoint world this week. So the first thing that we want to talk about, and the first thing we talk about every week, is the production notes. And those of you that were here last week know that the production notes were going to be good this week because last week didn't go very well. So here's a little bit of backstory on what happened last week. So last week we got started about 40 minutes late, something like that. So what happened was right about the time I was going to go live with everything, it just wouldn't go. Ustream wouldn't stream with the Ustream producer. I have an app. It's like a podcasting app that I use from Ustream, and that just wouldn't wouldn't find my cameras. It just wouldn't work. And I've had problems in the past with that, where I get like this USB issue with my Microsoft webcam, because I got a whole bunch of webcams pointing to me right now, and that wasn't working. And so I thought, well, maybe it's the Ustream producer thing. So then I tried just going to the Ustream webpage, and that wouldn't work, because normally you can just do it. You can go live and it'll pick up the camera. That didn't work. I tried the Internet Explorer. I tried with Firefox. Nothing ever worked. So, and then I tried a couple things, and I think what happened, and you guys are going to be all like, duh, about an hour before I went live, there was the strangest thing ever. I've never seen this before. There was a Flash update, and I was getting things ready. I'm like, oh yeah, Flash, whatever. I don't want the bad guys to own my PC. So I went ahead and updated Flash, and I can only imagine that that's what broke, because when I went to the webpage stuff, it's just Flash. It's just a Flash app, and that used to work. So that happened. I just couldn't do anything. So the machine was just unusable. So I ended up flipping over to another machine and doing it. But that was my laptop, and we all know my laptop has this crazy habit of bursting into flames when I've got a bunch of webcams on it. So that's why last week, number 155, the production was a little off. And actually, the audio, so when I record this, I'm actually recording this in 3 places right now. I'm broadcasting, I'm streaming on Ustream, and also recording it onto Ustream. I'm recording it with the webcam software, and that's when you get the WMV and the iPod versions, that's what records that. And I'm also recording the audio separately with a program called Audacity. And I've had that set up for like a year and a half now. I find that Audacity takes better sound, and also the program that I use to render out the video stuff doesn't render out a clean MP3. It munges up the MP3 headers. So folks who were trying to listen to it on Android and things like that were having problems with it. So I'm like, all right, no problem. I'll just start recording it with Audacity also. And that's the way I've been doing it for quite a while now. Last week, my machine was so freaked out that the audio, the Audacity recording, and the video recording that I had started at exactly the same time and stopped at exactly the same time weren't the same length. The audio recording was about 10 minutes shorter because the machine was freaking out and overheating and all that kind of stuff, and so it just couldn't keep up. So last week's audio, the audio for 155, is actually an extraction of the audio from the video and then pulled into Audacity and all that kind of stuff. So you'll notice last week the audio was kind of freaky. The intro was really loud. The voice was really soft. Normally that's just my normal soothing, loving voice. But last week it was because I just had an issue on top of issue on top of issue. So this week, so then that was Monday night and most of Tuesday, I spent a lot of time cussing, screaming at the heavens because I was having all these problems. And I decided that machine that I recorded all this on just needed to go, needed to be wiped. It was a Rackspace desktop that they gave me for this, but it had the Rackspace image on it, so it had a whole bunch of extra stuff. So F-disk and format, started from scratch, installed everything fresh last week and partially today. And that's what I'm recording on now. So fresh installs of Audacity and you know, the Ustream stuff and all that. So hopefully tonight's Netcast will go pretty well. I got started a couple minutes late, but that wasn't because of any technical difficulties. I was just being lazy, chatting with the folks in the chat room. They were kind enough to not make fun of my hair and all that until after I started recording. So that was good of them. I appreciate that. But so that's where everything went. So hopefully going forward, a lot of these audio and video things will sort themselves out, because I've got a dedicated machine for this, and everything's fresh. So, but thanks for the folks in the chat room who've been helping me troubleshoot some stuff tonight. Mark Chrisman's mentioning that I didn't get all new gear. Well, part of the reason was I was gone half of last week on a vacation, so I just didn't do much. But we'll probably be upgrading some stuff. I've got some plans in the works. We just got to figure out how to do it, where to do it, but trying to get some better cameras, things like that. So that was last week's story. But again, the machine's been rebuilt, completely formatted, and all that. Another production note that I was brought to my attention earlier today, and I still haven't fixed. Somebody on Twitter said, "Hey Todd," they must have terrible friends, but they said, "Hey, I heard about your Netcast and I want to watch it. Where can I find out more information?" And I'm like, "Hey, go to toddklindt.com/netcast. You can find everything you need to know at toddklindt.com/netcast. I put it all on one page. Couldn't be easier. toddklindt.com/netcast." And then they emailed back and said, "Yeah, that's great and all, but when is it? When does it start?" And I said, "Oh, it's right there on." Oh, son of a. So I don't have the actual starting time and all that on the web page. I don't mention that it's Monday, 8:30 Central. So he'd been downloading them, but I don't ever mention that. So I will update that page. I haven't done it yet, but I'll update the Netcast page. I'm going to put a little more information. But for those of you that download the podcast, I do record this live Monday nights at 8:30 Central Time. So that's 8:30 in Iowa, 9:30 in Florida, or most of Florida, except for the Panhandle, 7:30 in Denver, or 6:30 in Seattle, whatever time zone you're in. But I will put that up on the page so that you can actually get that information. But also, for those of you that are listening to the podcast, you can go to toddklindt.com. You can watch it live. You can view the chat room, all that kind of stuff. All these jokers are in the chat room right now making fun of my hair, my clothes, my speech patterns, all that kind of stuff. Brutal. So if you want to pick on me, the chat room is the place to do it. You can get in there. There's also, links to other stuff in there. But I'll try to kind of keep that updated. But also, if you're downloading the MP3 version of the Netcast, you can get a video version that's WMV. You can get a video version for your iPods at that same location. And also, I've got a YouTube channel. So if you want to consume this stuff on YouTube, you can go to youtube.com/ToddKlindtNetcast. I couldn't, because of Google and YouTube being dumb, I couldn't get youtube.com/ToddKlindt. So Todd Klindt Netcast. I try to keep on all my social media. I try to keep everything the same. I'm Todd Klindt on Twitter. I'm Todd Klindt on Facebook. I'm Todd Klindt on LinkedIn. I wanted to be Todd Klindt on YouTube, but because YouTube and Google are dumb, I can't have it. So, but the good news is nobody can. So you can go to Todd Klindt Netcast and watch these on YouTube if you want. So that is all of that. So for production notes, I think that is all of it. Hopefully next week the production notes will be, I can't believe it, everything went perfectly. But I think we all know that's not going to happen. Okay. So now on to the topics for this week. So again, I was out on vacation for most of last week. And then the part of last week that I wasn't on vacation, I spent rebuilding the box as doing all this. So we don't have a lot of topics to talk about this week, but we got some fun stuff. One of them was a big bit of fun that I had with a customer. Oh, I do love these kind of experiences. I was installing a SharePoint farm for a customer, and this farm came with a lot of baggage. This wasn't the first time that I had installed this farm. This wasn't the first time I'd installed a farm for them on this machine, but this was a test environment, so I'll give them a little bit of slack. But it was it was an environment that was their SharePoint testing, but there was also some other people that had access to it. And somebody had gone in and deleted SQL, had uninstalled SQL. And in the the vein of being very thorough, after they uninstalled SQL, they deleted all the databases because they had all these pesky database files, but there was no database engine, so why would you keep them around? So they deleted everything. And this customer, pretty sharp guy, but he's not a SharePoint guy only. He does other stuff, but he does SharePoint pretty well. Tried to fix things, and it got a little worse. It didn't get better. So we got in this weird situation where the SharePoint bits thought they were part of a farm, but there was no farm left to be a part of, and you couldn't easily get SharePoint out of a farm because it needs to talk to SQL. It needs to see that config DB. There was a bunch of problems. So he and I went back and forth. We kind of got things worked out, got things going, and rebuilt SharePoint. And again, they had backups all their databases, but it was a mess. So anyway, we got SharePoint mostly built, and I've got a blog post out there. I probably should have a link to it somewhere, where I kind of talk about the steps that I go through when I'm installing a SharePoint 2010 farm. And one of the things that I do is after I create my search service application, I just do a crawl just to make sure everything's wired correctly. There's obviously no content to be found, nothing to add to the index, but I just want to make sure that we don't get any errors, things like that. Because if we do, then we know, we haven't done much yet, so we know where the problems probably are. And those didn't work. Search didn't work. Search kind of worked, but it didn't completely work. And it failed with some weird errors that I hadn't seen before. So I started poking around, and then I went back to go to Central Admin to fix some stuff, and Central Admin went away. I'm like, wow, this is really getting bad. So I'm kind of thinking back, okay, it used to work. What was the last thing we did? We messed with search a little bit. We messed with some the content sources and stuff like that. I have never seen that kill Central Admin before, but it's that whole thing. What's changed? Well, this has changed. So we couldn't get into Central Admin to clean search up. So I jumped into PowerShell, went in there. Manipulating content sources inside of PowerShell isn't very easy. I spent a little bit of time fighting with that, and then just decided, there wasn't much there. Deleted the search service app inside of PowerShell, cleared that all out, rebooted the box. Central Admin's still dead. Getting an internal 500 error. So that's usually like an app pool thing. That's an IIS thing. That's a 500 error means that IIS is mad long before SharePoint has a chance to get mad. So like, all right, we got an IIS error. So I start poking through. I'm like, man, it's acting like this, like these accounts aren't good. This is the, and then if you look through my my install step, the last step I do is I run group policy update, GP update, in case the customer has some weird group policy that breaks SharePoint. This customer did, but the GP, the group policy object got updated in the middle of me doing my install, so it actually broke in the middle. And so that was the problem. The farm account was not, or I guess it wasn't the farm account, it was the internet user group. I forget exactly which group it was not allowed to have a specific right that it needed. And as soon as that group policy came in, it pulled it out of that group and it broke SharePoint. And at that point, really all I had up and going was Central Admin, and so that was where the problem was. So I spent probably an hour, maybe a little more, fighting with that. And like Doug in the chat room says, they got me again. Those sneaky GPOs got me again. So that brings me though to and so this was a thing where this was a company. And I said, hey, these are the permissions that I need as a big company. They said, oh, our security guys are going to freak out. You can't have that permission. And so I had to point them to the TechNet article that talks about the permissions that every account needed. And I had to show them the spot in the TechNet article that says, here is the permission that you guys have a group policy about, and here is the account that's missing from there. I mean, I just had to get to that level to get this all working. But once we got that fixed, then everything is up and going. But I bring that up for a couple reasons. Number one, to just remind everybody, including myself, I don't know how many times I've talked about this on this Netcast. These group policy objects nail me every time. It happened again, and it still took me an hour to figure it out. So I want to bring it up so that you guys don't get hit by it. So remember that. And also this TechNet article is a good one to kind of have in your back pocket if you ever have any weird permission issues. then this tells what everything needs to have. So that was a painful one, but we got it all working. Okay, so here's another one, and this is something I've been working on a little bit lately, but need to work on a little bit more. Just need to play with a little bit more. Is the workflow manager in SharePoint 2013. So just kind of as a recap, in SharePoint 2013, they have built in all of the workflow 2010 infrastructure. Excuse me. So when you bring a SharePoint 2010 database in to SharePoint 2013, workflow just works, just like it did in 2010. But now in SharePoint 2013, there's this expanded workflow stuff. And to get that, you need to install the workflow manager. And you can install that either on your SharePoint box or on a separate box, doesn't matter. And for our customers, we've kind of been doing a little bit of each. Depends on how big the customer is, whether they're going to be using a lot of workflows, that kind of stuff. But since this is a separate product, it's a separate product, so it needs to be installed separately, configured separately, more importantly, patched separately. And so last week, on the 30th, Microsoft published a blog post on how to update the Workflow 2013 Workflow Manager. And it just kind of walks through how to do some things. So I think most of that stuff is going to be pretty obvious to you, but it did bring up one thing that I hadn't thought about, in that if you have dedicated workflow servers, so let's say you have a 4-server farm in SharePoint 2013. We'll make it simple for demonstration's sake. You've got 2 web front ends, those are the ones that your users are hitting, and you've got 2 app servers that have everything that your end users don't hit directly. Service applications, search, all that kind of stuff. And you've decided to install the workflow manager on one of those servers. I mentioned 1 instead of 2 because for the workflow manager to be highly available, it needs to be installed on 3. Long story, I'll explain it in a later netcast. But so you install the workflow manager on a 4th box, and you install the manager, you configure it and all that. But you have to install the workflow client on all the servers in your SharePoint farm, because your clients are going to be doing some stuff. That's all pretty well laid out. That's pretty obvious. When you run the workflow manager setup, when you're looking through it, it spells that out for you. You got to install the client on all the other boxes in your farm. Good enough. This TechNet article that I'm talking about, though, is talking about upgrading your server, putting a cumulative update, one of the periodic updates on, but it reminds us that we also have to patch the client, which is not something that I normally remember to do. So you've got these other 3 servers that are just running the workflow client. When you're upgrading the workflow manager, you don't think to upgrade the client piece, the other piece. So don't forget to do that. So that's it. And there's some PowerShell in there you can do to upgrade some things. But we've got a couple of customers who are really excited about workflows in 2013, and they've been asking a lot of questions and how to get things configured, the high availability part, things like that. And so this is coming up a lot, and that's why I got this blog post out, because it was something that they were asking about. But the workflow manager stuff is pretty cool. It's got some expanded capabilities. Maybe sometime in one of the netcasts I'll just talk about some of the new things they added, because there are some pretty cool new pieces of functionality in there. All right, so this is one that was inspired by our very own Wonder Laura Rogers in the chat room here. She was installing some stuff today and had to install the Office client, so Word, Excel, OneNote, all that jazz. And so her and I were just kind of talking a little bit about what she should install. And so her first question was, is Office 2013, is it worthy of being installed on the Wonder Laura Wonder Box? And I said, yeah, Office 2013 has been pretty good. I use it on all mine. I installed the new Netcast box, and that got Office 2013. Everything's good to go. And then she asked the next question, which is a pretty common question, and it came up a lot a few years ago. It kind of died down, but now it's coming up again. And her question was, do I install the 32-bit version or the 64-bit version? So this is a non-intuitive question, because in most cases, we all deal with farms and all that kind of stuff. The answer is always, if you've got a 64-bit box, install the 64-bit version. You get a bigger memory footprint, everything's just going to work better. It's a no-brainer, you always do that. But in this case, that's not the right answer. In this case, for the Office client, you should install the 32-bit version unless you really need the 64-bit version. Like my wife's an accountant, and they do everything in Excel. Much like that whole adage, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All I've got is SharePoint, so everything looks like a SharePoint thing. For accountants, everything looks like it can be done in Excel. Everything. And my wife has showed me some amazingly huge, gargantuan Excel spreadsheets. At one point, with an earlier version of Office, my wife complained about the 65,000 row limitation that Excel had. Are you kidding me? That's crazy. So for people like that, the 64-bit version of Office is a good thing to have because they need that extra flexibility. But for those of us who don't need that, it's not a good fit. And the reason for that is because there's a whole bunch of things that the 64-bit version of Office doesn't do. And for us specifically, in SharePoint context, there are things like ActiveX controls and things like that, that if you have the 64-bit version of Office installed, when SharePoint tries to reach back to Office to fire some of these things up, like the whole export to Excel and those kind of things, they're not going to show up because the 64-bit version of Office is just not going to work. So my advice to Laura was to install the to install the 32-bit version of Office. She would be fine. But the link that I threw in the chat room and that I will have in the show notes is kind of a comparison between the two. It's a Microsoft document where they talk about, should I install the 64-bit or 32-bit version, and it kind of gives you an idea what you're giving up. But my recommendation is, unless you can explain to me why you need the 32-bit version, my advice is that I screwed that all up. My advice is that unless you can explain to me why you need the 64-bit version, then you should install the 32-bit version. And I mixed that up enough times that you are all completely confused by now, I'm sure. But you should install the 32-bit version. That's the best. All right, so thanks to Laura for that. And you guys don't forget about Laura. She's going to come back later in tonight's Netcast. This is foreshadowing. Okay, so this was another great blog post. It just came out today. This one is only 9 hours old, so this one is still hot off the presses. Kirk Evans, guy at Microsoft. If you're not following Kirk Evans' blog, shame on you. You absolutely should. He's got a whole bunch of, really great technical content on his blog. Recently minted MCM, if I remember correctly. But he put out a great blog post today. And Kirk is one of those guys that hangs out on Yammer. I am not one of those guys that hangs out on Yammer. But apparently there was a discussion about whether you should use SharePoint groups or Active Directory groups in SharePoint 2013 when you're doling out permissions. And so one of the things that they brought up was that if you don't, let me see if I say this correctly. If you do use SharePoint groups to add people to a SharePoint site, it triggers a full crawl inside of SharePoint, and that of course has all the downsides of a full crawl, performance and slow index refresh and all that kind of stuff. And the person in Yammer was asking if somebody from Microsoft could confirm or deny that. So Kirk stepped up to the plate and he said, I will confirm or deny that. And one of the things I love about Kirk's blog posts is they are incredibly detailed, incredibly techy and nerdy, and they got lots of pictures. So after you read, words, you start nodding off, you can look at the pictures. So Kirk writes good blog posts. But basically, what he talks about how he set his thing up. But he shows how when you've got a SharePoint site, when you do incremental crawls, there are some places where search looks to see what has changed since it did its last index. And if you make changes to security inside of SharePoint, so that means going into the people and groups and adding a person or adding somebody to a group, if you make any permissions changes, SharePoint goes through and does a full security index because it does security trimming. It wants to make sure when it, responds to a query and puts the results on the page that it doesn't show anybody anything they don't have access to. And if you go around and start changing permissions, well, then it has to reevaluate whether somebody has permission to something. So he shows he's got some graphs and some numbers, and they don't even look made up. I mean, they look like they're real stuff about how if you add a person to a group, to a SharePoint site, how it triggers this full crawl for the security. And if you add somebody to a group inside of SharePoint, it does the same thing. Again, because SharePoint needs to know who has access to what, and you've changed that list for that site collection. So he shows how you can check this in SQL. He's pretty upfront about the fact that you shouldn't do this in a production environment because you're doing queries against SQL. So he talks about that, and so he confirms that if you add somebody to a SharePoint group, it triggers this security thing. And then he goes through and he does the same thing but with an Active Directory group. He takes an Active Directory group that has 12 people in it, puts them in a SharePoint group, does the crawl, adds 12 more people to the Active Directory group, and then does another crawl, and it doesn't do a full security crawl. Why is that? Because as far as SharePoint's concerned, nothing has changed from a security standpoint. There is a single security principal, which is that AD group, that has permission, and it's up to Windows to figure out if the person logged in is a member of that group or not. So as far as SharePoint's concerned, the permissions have not changed. Therefore, there's no reason to recheck the security. Good stuff. So so from a real world practical standpoint, we're talking about indexes being shorter when they run. We're talking about results being not having any stale results because you've done a query in the middle of a crawl, things like that. And so he did a great, very thorough job of answering the question that was asked, which was, if you add users to a SharePoint group, does that impact search negatively? And the answer to that is most assuredly yes. Kirk does a very good job of explaining that. But what I want to take, and I don't mean to criticize Kirk's blog post, because Kirk's blog post is excellent and very thorough. But what I don't want people to take away from this blog post is that Microsoft or anybody is recommending that you quit using SharePoint groups and move exclusively to Active Directory groups. That is not what this is about. And because, so Kirk has done a great job of explaining one of the downsides of SharePoint groups, but it's a bigger question than that. And one of the things that I've found, because this question comes up all the time when I set up new farms and we talk to people about governance and how to grow things and that kind of stuff, this question inevitably comes up, should I use SharePoint groups or AD groups? And the answer is always, it's a combination of the two. And then what that combination is depends on what permissions people in your company have. Like, is it a big company where people have very fine-grained permissions, or is it a small company where you have a couple of guys that have permission to everything? That matters. And then it also matters how sensitive things are, because if you add somebody to a SharePoint group, the site collection administrator can go into SharePoint and can see exactly who has permissions to anything at any time, and they can change it, and they can pull people out, they can add people. It's very flexible, it's very transparent, and the site collection administrator can do it without involving IT, without waiting for IT. It just happens and it's done. So that's one huge thing in favor of site collection groups, because if they have to do everything with Active Directory groups, then this poses two big problems. The site collection administrator can't see who has access to their stuff because SharePoint doesn't resolve the Active Directory group in its interface. Now, there are some third-party tools that used to do that, and I don't know if they're still out there, where you could drop a web part on a page that would resolve an AD group that would help some of that kind of stuff. But that's one of those problems. So if you get a site collection administrator, they have a tough point. And so Lori's mentioning in the chat room that DeliverPoint can do that. There are probably some third-party tools that can do that, but it's more hassle. And so that's one of the things, they can't tell at a moment's notice who has permission, but they also can't change it. So then they have to submit an IT ticket or whatever, and everybody hates doing that. So for flexibility and all that kind of stuff, the SharePoint groups have a very legitimate place in your SharePoint governance plan. Now, for Active Directory groups, they've got a couple things going for them too. Number one, we've got the search thing that Kirk explains very well. Number two, there's probably a really good chance that whoever you want to give access to in SharePoint already has a group. Like if you've got the finance site collection, you don't need to go in and add every person in finance, because there's a really good chance there's already a finance Active Directory group you can just drop in and not have to worry about it. And then when the new interns come in, they get dropped in the AD group. They automatically get dropped into the SharePoint. It's that much easier. So that's good. The other thing is, in really large organizations, and I haven't fought this for a while, there is a limit to how many security principles you can add to a SharePoint site collection. There's actually a size limit in kilobytes. And if you have to add thousands and thousands of users, if you've got a big site collection with lots of webs and you're doing all this kind of stuff, you can actually fill that up. I've actually been at a customer that did that they had so many individual users added to a site collection that it broke permissions because the ACL got too long, got too big. Now, that's not going to happen very often. I've heard of maybe like 2 other times that's ever happened. But that's something to consider. So what you're going to end up having for every situation is some combination of the two. You're going to have some Active Directory groups that you're going to add, but you're also going to have to make heavy use of SharePoint groups too. But thanks to Kirk Evans, Kirk's friend of mine, good guy, writes some awesome blog posts, so go through and read those. But thanks to him for going to the trouble of testing that. This doesn't look like this happened quickly. He was very thorough with his testing, so thanks to him for going through all that. So there's nothing. All right, so winding down. So I mentioned that last week I went on vacation for a couple of days, and but before I left, it was very exciting. I work from home here. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anything, and the doorbell rang. And it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm like, holy cow! It's FedEx or UPS. So I run upstairs just as fast as I can. I'm all very excited. And it's a package that I didn't order, and it's for me, and I'm all very excited. And what is it? It's a new SharePoint book. Oh, so Laura Rogers and some other folks, Amanda Perrin, Shane Perrin, Jennifer Mason, maybe you've heard of her too. They wrote a book, and Laura sent me a copy. So thank you very much to Laura for sending this to me. I've actually read some of it. And continuing with the cloud paradigm that Rox is using, theirs has paper airplanes on the cover, kind of cool. But their book is about building business solutions for SharePoint 2013. And it's all about how to make the most out of SharePoint 2013 with out-of-the-box stuff. So, how to do out-of-the-box web parts and content types and all this kind of stuff. So this is one of those books where if you want to just have some demos, if you're an IT pro and you want to sell the business on SharePoint, you can't just show them a team site or develop a publishing site. You need to have functionality because that's what they care about. They want to know how to do things. So this book is a great way to show them some of the things that they can actually do, because it's all about building solutions with out-of-the-box stuff. SharePoint Designer, those kind of things. So this is the next step. So even IT pros need to understand how to do some of this stuff, because if you've got a user who calls up and they're like, workflows don't work or something like that, you need to know enough of this to understand what they're talking about and to be able to get in and reproduce it and understand what can happen. So for IT pros, these kind of books are very handy. So the other group that these are handy for is developers. So developers need books like this too, because developers, when they're tasked with something, business unit comes to them and says, hey, we need a web part that does blah or something like that. Developers, for the most part, they just jump right into C#. They're like, oh yeah, I know how to code that. I can do the thing with the object model and the other thing. And while that probably works, it's a waste of the developer's time because it's already there. You don't have to do it. But the other thing is that it's not as easy to maintain, because now it's code. And if you just use out-of-the-box stuff, when you upgrade, it's going to work. But if you have to write custom code, then when you upgrade the next time, you got to worry about maintaining that code. So these kind of books are great for developers to at least thumb through and read through so that they know what out-of-the-box capabilities are. And the hallmark of a good book, there's a lot of things that make a good book. A good team, knowledge of the writers, all that kind of stuff, good production. But one of the things that really sets most books apart and really takes a good book and makes it a great book is whether my picture's in it. And if you get this book, or when you get this book, if you go to page 360, oh geez, there I am, right there. How exciting is that? So you know that this is a quality book because it's got my picture right in it. And so that's very cool. So congrats to Laura and Jennifer and Shane and Amanda. Very cool book. I've read through a little bit of it. It's got some good stuff in there. I've absolutely learned some things. And you can buy that on Amazon or where other fine books are sold. Let me put a link out there in the chat room for that. So good stuff. It's all good stuff. You got to read it. It's a lot of fun. All right. So again, thanks to Laura for that. While you're out buying books, if you got a minute and you need to buy some books, you're looking for a demo, or you got to get above a certain thing. Don't forget about this one. Professional SharePoint 2013 administration. My picture's in this good one. Also, we already agreed that the hallmark of a great technical book is whether my picture's in it. This book fits that bill. My picture is in this book, so that we can right there. Those of you, that's me right there. I'm that handsome devil right there. So this is a good book. It's got all kinds of great stuff. It's got intrigue. It's got mystery. It's got romance. It's just all kinds of good stuff. It does though have some typos in it, and so I wanted to bring this up. Whenever you publish a book, you always do everything you can to get typographical errors out. You write the chapter and you read through it. You submit it. A technical editor reads the chapter and he reads through it. And then there's a content editor that reads through the chapter, takes out all the jokes, and finds the typographical errors. All that kind of stuff. But sometimes these things always sneak through. It just happens. And so we found a couple, and we'll get them corrected. But one of the first ones, for those of you who have a copy of the book, Professional SharePoint 2013 Administration, if you turn to page 552, both 552 and 553 have a typo in them. And I haven't figured out exactly where it is. But if you turn to page 552, it's about the Office web apps, and it's showing how you can use the Office web apps to display a PowerPoint document. And the PowerPoint document's got a typo in it. The title on the PowerPoint document is 101 Reasons Todd Stinks. And so I can only imagine that title was supposed to be 101 Reasons Why Shane Stinks, or maybe 101 Reasons Todd Rocks, something. But there's just something. 552 and 553 both have that typo in them. I've already talked to the editor about it. We'll get that fixed for future printings of the book. But other than that, a rock solid book, good stuff. You can go out to my website. You can go to toddklindt.com/prosp2013admin. and download that or order that. You can order it on Amazon. You can download digital copies from Rocks. If you want to order a signed copy, so you could possibly own the very book that I'm touching right now, when you go to that blog post, toddklindt.com/prosp2013admin, you can order a copy of the book directly from me. And when you do that, I bought a box of them, and I'll sign it, autograph it to you, ship it to you myself. Bunch of people in the chat room have already done that. They've all gotten their books. They're all big fans. You can do that. And if you bought my self-published book for free advice, you paid $4.99 for that. And like Trevor in the chat room can attest, if you paid the $4.99 for free advice, I'll knock $4.99 off the cost of this book. So you essentially get free advice for free, which is kind of how free advice and all that. So go out there. The book is great. We're very proud, very excited to have it up and going. And so I'd like to thank everybody, everybody for their support in that. And Tim in the chat room has found another typographical error. They're all over. And I think it's important to note those typographical errors are in Shane's chapters. I don't know why. I don't know what happens. With that guy, I don't know, dropped on his head, something, I don't know. But hope you enjoyed the book. If you've got questions about it or whatever, shoot me an email. Love to help. Okay. Oh, and I forgot we're doing this shameless self-promotion now. So we got a couple emails this last week about what conferences and stuff that I'm going to. And so going to be in New Orleans the first week of June for TechEd North America, and Shane and I are doing a pre-conference session on Sunday. It's going to be install, config, just general SharePoint 2013 administration. And then we're also doing a session on Thursday. And I forget what that one's on, but I'm sure it's going to be riveting. It's going to be very professional, very polished, all the things that you expect when you go to a Shane and Todd session. It's going to have all that in spades. And that's on Thursday afternoon. So we've got like the beginning and the end. I don't know what we're going to do in the middle, but we've got all that. If you're in Europe or Asia or otherwise just want to go to Spain, the last week of June, I'll be in Tech Ed Madrid. Shane's not going along. I think he's not allowed in Spain. We were there, and we were in Barcelona 6 years ago. It was a big thing. So I don't know that he's allowed back in the country, but I will be there. And I believe one of my Rackspace cohorts from the UK office is going to be down filling in for Shane. Thank God, I've been asking for a new sidekick for like 7 years now. So that's finally happened. So we'll be doing the same 2 sessions in Madrid at the end of June. So you can go to northamerica.msteched.com to sign up for that one, or you can go to europe.msteched.com if you are in Europe. So I got that one in August. I will be going to SPTechCon. You can go to sptechcon.com and find out all about that. I have no idea what sessions we're doing. Shane submitted them all, so I can only assume that there are going to be more sessions on how I'm the handsomest man alive, things like that. I think he's kind of got a crush. I can't prove it, but that's at SPTechCon. So go to sptechcon.com to sign up for that. It's like August 11th, 12th, and 13th in Boston. If you haven't signed up, when you sign up, you can put in a promotional code Klindt, which is my last name. I get the eternal gratitude of the people from SPTechCon, and I don't know if you get some money off the conference or whatever. I don't remember, but you can put that in and see what happens. And I still haven't, I recorded the thing with Hilton a couple weeks ago for the Moss show. That hasn't come out yet. I checked right before I went on the air. So I'm sure that he's trying his darndest to splice and edit that thing so that I sound intelligent so that he can actually publish it. So that'll be coming out at some point. But don't be afraid to get out on Twitter, which you can't tell, but I'm pointing at Twitter right now very menacingly. Get out on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @TheMossShow. And say, hey, what the hell, man? Where is that Moss Show interview with Todd Klindt? What's going on here? Why are you holding out on us? Don't be afraid to go out there and give Hilton some hell, because he likes that kind of stuff. Even negative attention is attention, and he thrives on it. So that's it. So that all the topics that I have. Once again, I shot for a half an hour and went 43 minutes. I'm awesome at this pacing thing. A true professional. I think you all know that. But thanks to everybody, the chat room, for helping me troubleshoot. Things went off pretty smooth tonight as far as I can tell. Machine hasn't tried to blow up. I haven't lost anything. Sound was a little weird at the beginning, but I got that fixed. So thanks everybody. I will be back here next week for Netcast 157. Hopefully another very smoothly going Netcast. Thanks to everybody, and I'll see you next week.